21-year-old Romona Moore of Canarsie, Brooklyn, was reported missing more than 2 weeks ago. An anonymous caller told her parents to look under an old ice cream truck in an alley just blocks from their home. Romona Moore was born on October 8, 1981, and resided in the Canarsie section of Brooklyn, New York. Her family originally hailed from Guyana, where she was born. The family would make their way to the States later on, when she was just 4 years old, looking for more opportunities for their family. Romona was an only child, described as a hard-working, charismatic, beautiful young woman, always in the best of spirits and very much focused. When she and the family moved to Brooklyn, she would attend local schools not far from their home, where she quickly adjusted and made many friends, some of them hailing from the same tight-knit West Indian community that she was raised in. She attended Brooklyn College Academy High School, located at 350 Coney Island Avenue, an alternative high school where the classes were smaller than other schools, and the students called their teachers by their first names. The main campus of the school was inside Brooklyn College, with Romona taking classes at the annex location. Friends called her studious and very intelligent, also a very timid girl who seemed to always have a smile on her face when spoken to. Referred to as an angel with a big heart and liked by all the students that she got to know, she was a, quote, bookworm who was always focused on her work. She kept great grades and never missed a day of class in 3 years of going to college. A pleasant girl who never had issues with other students or anyone for that matter. She never got into any trouble and mainly kept to herself. She was just a young girl who was very much looking forward to her future. Soon after graduation, Romona was ready to commit to college, setting her sights on Hunter College in Manhattan, where she would major in psychology. She had big plans of building a thriving career, hoping to make enough money to one day move into Manhattan and get a nice apartment, something she brought up quite often. Unfortunately, those dreams of a future full of success would come to a horrifying end, and it all began on April 24, 2003. That morning in Brooklyn began like any other. It was about 60 to 65 degrees in the city, cool and calm, the signs of spring starting to show all around. Romona let her mother know that she would be leaving the home soon. She wanted to go to a local record store to pick up some CDs, and then head to a Burger King not far from the home. She wanted to grab something to eat, since she didn't want leftovers from the night before. She finished getting ready, said bye to her family, and off she went. The day went on like it normally would until Ramona's mother noticed that she wasn't back home yet, and she hadn't heard from her. It was around 11 p.m. that same night when her family would begin to get worried. At the same time, they weren't assuming the worst. They thought maybe she was just at a friend's house, but deep inside, they knew something wasn't right. She would normally at least call to let them know where she was. This wasn't like her at all. No call and no sign at all from her. It was a very unsettling feeling for her family. They didn't want to make assumptions, but they knew that they had to act fast. They would report her missing the very next morning, while they needed help from the authorities to locate Romona and make sure that she was safe. According to the family, they received everything but help. They stated that from pretty much the moment they filed a missing persons report, one of the two main detectives on the case quickly brushed the claims off. He said that Romona was probably out partying or with a boyfriend. Police also said that Romona was a 21-year-old woman. If she didn't want to come back home, she didn't have to, and there wasn't much they would or could do about it. The family felt like it was a total disregard for their concerns. They knew Romona better than this. She would never just leave her family behind. Discouraged and left to fend for themselves, Ramona's family and friends all took to the streets, posting missing persons flyers and searching the Brooklyn neighborhood themselves, hoping to find her safe, but to no avail. She was nowhere to be found. A full police investigation wasn't started until April 28, 2003, 3 long days after Ramona's family first reported her missing. The days kept going by with no trace of her, and nobody had any idea what might have happened. That's until Saturday, May 10, 2003, when Ramona's family received a disturbing phone call. When they answered, it was the voice of a man on the other end, speaking with a noticeable West Indian accent. He didn't reveal his identity. He had disturbing news to share. The man, who had presumably seen those missing persons flyers with the family's number, said that he had heard a young woman screaming just days before. He said the girl that he heard might have been Romona and that her life might have been taken. He said she was left somewhere nearby, wrapped in plastic. He would continue to say that her body had been left next to an ice cream truck near 5755 Kings Highway, just 5 minutes from Ramona's Remsen Avenue home. They also made mention of Snyder Avenue and a second younger girl who had been held captive and violated. Very specific. The sickening details threw Ramona's mother into a shocked daze. It was the last thing the family ever wanted to hear. But, determined to learn the true fate of her daughter, Ramona's mother went to where the caller said and found an abandoned ice cream truck behind a fence, right next to an abandoned building at 5749 Kings Highway, located pretty much right next to where the family was told to go on that phone call. As authorities arrived, they would find Ramona's mother already at the location, standing outside. May 11th, the very next day, would have been Mother's Day, and here she was, being told that her only child might be right here, deceased. It's the last thing any parent ever expects to hear. As authorities canvassed the space near the ice cream truck, they would find what looked like a body wrapped in a gray blanket and tied up, right between the truck and the wall of the abandoned building. They pulled the body out and unwrapped it, revealing a young woman whose body was in horrifying condition. According to police, she was wearing no clothes, and her face was, quote, gone between decomposition, maggots, the elements, and whatever was done to her. They couldn't tell exactly what was done or with what, but the injuries all over her entire body were indescribable. Only an hour after that anonymous phone call came in, the family finally had an answer. The body was confirmed to be that of their beloved Ramona. She'd been violated and brutally beaten until she took her last breath. I would like to ask you to write in the comments which country you are watching this video from. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Underworld Expose and share this video with your friends. This story needs to be heard so that similar tragedies do not repeat themselves. The news was as devastating for her loved ones as you might imagine. Her mother never expected to be coping with such a heavy tragedy, especially when it came to her loving daughter, who never had any enemies. They had no idea who would ever do this to her. Nothing made sense. A crippling grief quickly set in. At the family's home, Ramona's stepfather changed the locks on their doors, fearing that whoever did this to their daughter might have her keys. They feared that they might come to the home and try to do harm to the rest of the family, and that fear was justified. They needed answers. Who was this person who called them? And how did they know where to find Ramona's body? Was the person on the other end of that phone the same person responsible? Questions that would keep her family up at night as they desperately sought answers. In an episode of the series NYPD 24/7, which followed Ramona's story as it unfolded, it's clear that within just hours of discovering her body, police had their eyes on a caretaker who was cleaning the property when they arrived. They questioned him extensively, and while they had nothing to really connect him to the crime, to them, he seemed like a potential suspect. This guy is adding up. This guy, I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but he's adding up, the lead detective could be heard telling colleagues. But with nothing to tie him to the crime, the caretaker was let go, and authorities were back to square one, back to theories. While authorities continued their investigation, a funeral service was held for Romona Moore in Brooklyn, New York. The service was filled with hundreds of family members and friends, all grieving and trying their best to cope with this sudden and horrifying tragedy. Family and friends shared memories of her, as old home movies of happier times were projected onto a screen beside her flower-covered white casket. Many expressed their frustration and anger when it came to how police were handling Ramona's case, and they made it clear that they would stop at nothing to make their voices be heard. After Ramona was laid to rest, the family was no closer to getting justice. It had been weeks by now, and it just felt like this might be another case where the perpetrator just went under the radar and is never found. But that would all change once police interviewed two crucial witnesses. Police interviewed the other girl, who was said to be held captive at a home on Snyder Avenue, the second girl mentioned by that anonymous caller. She was only 15 years old. She had been kidnapped by two men, kept in the basement, violated, and beaten. She was able to escape when the men fell asleep after a night of drinking. While captive, she was bound to a chair with tape over her mouth and eyes as the two so-called men made sickening threats. They told her that her best bet was to just do what she was told, or else she would end up dead like the girl they had there the night before. They grabbed her face, twisting her head in the direction of where this supposed dead body was, asking her if she smelled the foul odor because the body was just starting to decompose. She couldn't see a thing and never smelled a dead body before, but that odor, it was unlike anything else. When the teen made her escape, she ran into an older woman upstairs in the home who saw her trying to leave, the grandmother of one of her captors. Rather than help the teen or alert authorities, she tried alerting the sleeping men, yelling at them that the girl was trying to leave. It was a miracle that she was even able to make it out. Shortly after she left the home, the teen contacted police and they soon apprehended 19-year-old Troy Hendricks, said to be one of the two men who violated this child, also both likely responsible for Ramona's slaying. Hendricks had a pending case against him and was now being held at Rikers, but by law, they couldn't ask him any questions involving Ramona. Detectives also interviewed a man who lived across the street from the Snyder Avenue home where all this was happening, said to be a friend of Hendricks. By this point, the home was being investigated for any clues, and within moments of being there, authorities could see bloodstains and poor attempts at a cleanup job. The man from across the street stated that he ran into Hendricks and another man, and they stated that they had a girl tied up in the basement. They casually mentioned how they had been beating her and violating her down there for some time already. According to him, he didn't believe a word they were saying until they lifted their shirts and revealed bloodstains all over them. They then took him downstairs and lifted a cover, revealing a girl sitting in a chair with a chain around her neck, completely covered in injuries. One of her eyes was swollen, her body was bruised, and her hands and feet had bandages from when these two men had apparently used a handsaw on them. It appeared that, in addition to violating her, they had been putting her through hours of torture. They told her to say hi to the guy, making her be the one to tell him about all the vile treatment that she had been enduring for 2 full days already and how they did it for fun. The young woman speaking to this witness was Ramona, but instead of getting help immediately, that witness kept it all to himself. He said he feared for his life because he lived right across the street. So instead of doing it himself, he had his girlfriend's uncle call the family anonymously so that he would have a clear conscience, which is why that caller knew so much. Unfortunately, it was all too little, too late. That witness would be the last person to see Ramona alive, other than her captors. If everything he was saying was true, that means her life was taken in the basement of this Snyder Avenue home and relocated to 5749 Kings Highway. With Hendricks already tied to the crime and in prison, authorities were now putting all their focus on the second person of interest in the slaying. On May 10th, the body of Romona Moore was found dumped alongside an abandoned house, assaulted, and she had been brutally beaten about the face, head, and chest. We are seeking the public's assistance in locating Keeson Pearson, a male, black, 21 years of age, 5 feet 11 inches, 160 pounds, police announced. Police were now searching the tri-state area for 21-year-old Keeson Pearson, who had an arrest record that included burglary and assault. Tips in their investigation would lead them to numerous locations in Brooklyn and Albany, but they turned up with nothing. Information would lead them far out of New York City and all the way to Atlanta, Georgia. Local Atlanta police would be responsible for performing a raid at a location that Pearson was said to be hiding with his girlfriend. This information led authorities nowhere once again. They returned home empty-handed and feeling very defeated. Then another tip came in, this time from Pearson's own friends. They were sickened by the shocking crimes that he was being accused of, and were well aware that there was an ongoing manhunt for him. They gave police information that would lead them to an apartment in Yonkers. Yonkers police would set up surveillance cameras outside of the apartment a little after 5 a.m. on May 21st, 2003. They weren't taking any risks of him escaping. This time, Pearson was here. Police called the apartment by phone and tried to get Pearson to turn himself in, but he didn't plan on making it easy. The woman who Pearson was staying with at this apartment returned home while it was all taking place. She gave them a key so they could enter. Bolt cutters were needed since there was a chain on the door. As authorities raided the apartment, Pearson had already barricaded himself in the bedroom with a bed pushed up against the locked door. He then hid inside of a closet. When they broke through the door, he jumped out of the closet with a knife in his hand, attempting to attack officers. They pulled out their weapons and fired twice, striking him once in his thigh. He was immediately then put in handcuffs and arrested on the spot. As he was questioned, he would at first try to deny any connection to what happened to Ramona, but after a while, he would confess, giving grisly details of what he did. and it was far worse than anyone had imagined. Ramona's family was, of course, told about the arrest, and while they were happy that someone was finally captured, it did very little to stop their pain, and the road to closure would be a long one. By January of 2006, a trial was underway for monsters Pearson and Hendricks in the slaying of Romona Moore. It would be here that a jury, for the first time, heard all the disturbing details of what was done to her. She was chained by her neck, hands, and feet. Her face was badly swollen from continuous beatings with foreign instruments and bare hands. She was brutally violated by the both of them for the 3 to 4 days that she was there. Cigarette burns were found under her eyes and on her eyelids. She was clad in only a sweater and panties while she was still alive. Weapons used to brutally beat her upon the face and body included a hammer and barbell. They also used a handsaw and a knife to slice up her fingers. Both the barbell and hammer were likely the weapons used to disfigure her face during their savage attack as they bludgeoned her. Due to the extensive injuries, medical examiners would conclude that she was tortured, and it didn't end quickly. Ramona's mother cried as she heard the details. She had the courage to take the stand for her daughter. She told the jury about her experience with detectives and how a failure to act might have played the biggest role in her daughter's slaying. If they had put the word out within a day, like they had with other cases that happened around the same time, they could have saved her life. A tip about that Snyder Avenue home she was held in might have come sooner. Police would state that they did everything they could in a timely manner, and the case couldn't easily be compared to others. She recalled sitting on the stand and watching the two monsters who did this to her daughter, smiling and winking at one another as she spoke, truly sickening behavior. It all weighed heavily on her and the rest of her loved ones. As if that wasn't terrible enough, having to go up there and speak about the day that her daughter went missing, it would all become much, much worse right after she got off the witness stand. It was then that Pearson and Hendricks would pull out shivs that they had stashed into their underwear, weapons that went unnoticed by metal detectors since they were plastic. In an instant, they were launching an attack inside of the courtroom. The place exploded into chaos as jury members hid and took cover. Hendricks lunged at an officer as jury members were leaving the courtroom, reaching for his gun and swinging the makeshift knife at everyone in his path. While that was happening, Pearson took his shiv and stabbed an attorney in the chin. It all happened almost instantly. Hendricks was pepper sprayed and overpowered, while Pearson was swarmed by officers. They were escorted out of the courtroom in wheelchairs, with Pearson laughing to himself as he was wheeled out. Not 1 ounce of remorse. It was clear that they knew they were probably going to be away for the rest of their lives, and this might be the perfect way to try to escape, to avoid facing what they had done by launching this attack and either successfully escaping or having their lives ended in the process, taking the easy way out. Whatever their goal was, it didn't work. The situation was now under control, but not before a terrifying attack that left Ramona's family and the entire courtroom shaken. It's scary to think what the outcome could have been had they actually gotten their hands on those officers' weapons. Due to this and other factors, the first trial would end in a mistrial, with a second trial beginning very shortly after. Throughout that second trial, Pearson would go on to claim that his early confession that he made to authorities about Ramona's slaying was coerced by police. He said his evening with Ramona ended with a hug, and he didn't harm her. He said his false confession came from his, quote, creativity and common sense, but nobody in the courtroom was buying it. On Thursday, March 23, 2006, both Pearson and Hendricks were convicted of violating, kidnapping, sodomy, and first-degree murder in the slaying of Romona Moore. And on Tuesday, April 11, 2006, they were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They'll never be free. You are a deadly human virus, a deadly vessel of human terror, the judge told Hendricks after handing down the sentence. Ramona's mother and the rest of the family were happy with the fact that these monsters would never be free again, but the feeling that not enough had been done, they just couldn't shake it. It's something they felt very strongly about, and that never changed. I would like to ask you to write in the comments which country you are watching this video from. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Underworld Expose and share this video with your friends. This story needs to be heard so that similar tragedies do not repeat themselves. Nobody could ever predict that something so horrific would ever happen to Ramona, but those days leading up to her slaying, those were crucial. She was still alive, probably thinking to herself that maybe this man who had been brought downstairs to that basement could find it in himself to get her some help. But he never did. Her family was just blocks away, searching everywhere they could, with no idea just how close she actually was. Imagine being a family and doing everything you could to find your loved one, but it doesn't feel like anyone's listening. Romona had her whole life ahead of her, and dreams of making great things happen for herself. She was a kind-hearted young woman with a very promising future. She had no idea that when she left her home that day, she would be snatched off the streets and met with this horrifying treatment, all at the hands of these two sick individuals who had the worst intentions in mind. She should still be here today, living the life that she dreamed of in her apartment somewhere in Manhattan. But that'll never happen. While the monsters responsible will spend every waking moment of the rest of their lives behind bars, Ramona's family will always struggle with how things were handled. They strive to always keep her name alive and never let her memory fade. If alive today, Romona would be 43 years old. Rest in peace, Romona Moore, and my deepest condolences go out to her family and her loved ones. You aren't forgotten.